Hello, and welcome to Live, Work, Thrive. I'm Micaela Birmingham, Scary Mommy executive producer, and I will be the moderator for tonight's panel. With only 28 days until the election, our role as women in deciding the next president has never been more important. Tonight, our panel will discuss how the future depends on the female vote and why we all need to make our voices heard. We will discuss everything from gun violence to childcare, the impact of COVID-19 on women, and how the female vote will shape our lives for the foreseeable future. Now join me in welcoming our panelists. We have Alyssa Milano, actor, producer, and activist. She's also an author of a new book called Project Class President. Thank you, Alyssa, for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
And Katie Hill, former Congresswoman, author of She Will Rise, Becoming a Warrior in the Battle for True Equality, and hot off the press, she's also going to have her life story made into a movie starring Elizabeth Moss. So that is exciting news. Congratulations, Katie, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So before we get started with tonight's talk, we just have a few quick reminders for the audience. You can submit your questions to our panel and interact with other viewers in the live chat room next to this window if you're viewing on desktop. For those of you viewing on mobile, you can email your questions to liveworkthrive@scarymommy. And if you are one of the first 100 to RSVP tonight, look out for your free gift, this cool girl power keychain from the Scary Mommy shop. Sign up early for all of our upcoming events and for your own free gift. And of course, stay in touch with Scary Mommy on LinkedIn and Scary Mommy TV on YouTube for all the updates. So let's get right into it. Let's start with you, Alyssa. We've recently mourned the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. What does her death mean for women's rights and freedoms, in your opinion?
Well, I'm actually very concerned about what it means for women's rights and freedoms. I think that it is up to each one of us to make sure that our rights don't get rolled back, and we're gonna have to fight. And so, and so it continues. This fight started, back with the suffragettes movement, and we're still fighting the same thing. I mean, we don't even have protections in the Constitution. So, I think that we're all going to have our work cut out for us, and it's hard to stay focused. Like in any normal time, that would be all of our focus. But because we also have the pandemic, because we also have so many people unemployed, 14 million children are sick and not sick, food insecure. So it's a rough time.
It certainly is. And on that note, in thinking about all the progress that was made, much of which we have RBG to thank, when we now think about the president's latest Supreme Court nominee, Amy Coney Barrett. Katie, I wanted to get your opinion on this nominee. We've heard that she's a member of the People of Praise Church, which, while members of which are Catholic, the practices of this group draw from fundamentalist and evangelical Christianity, less than the Vatican, I would say. We've even heard that there are submissive roles played by women, some of whom were or still are called handmaids. Do you think a membership in such a group may obscure a judge's ability to uphold the law? And specifically, what does that imply for women?
Yeah, so I don't think we should ever make it about somebody's religion, right? I think that there's a very clear and important reason for us to have the separation of church and state. And we got to remember that Speaker Pelosi is Catholic, Joe Biden is Catholic, and the majority of Catholics in Congress are Democrats. But we also, we have to look at people's records and what they are trying to, as far as their beliefs go, their religious beliefs, are they trying to force those beliefs on other people? And specifically, are they through the role on the bench, are they trying to kind of blur the lines of separation of church and state. And so for me, it's one thing if you believe these things, but if you truly have internalized this fundamental belief of women are inferior to men or should be submissive to men, and you are really effectively trying to force those beliefs on Americans through your role as a judge, it changes the equation completely. And that's why I have a real concern about Amy Coney Barrett's past, and I don't think that would even be coming up if she didn't have a history of making really concerning decisions around women's rights and around what this means for us moving forward as far as women's equality, especially when she's replacing somebody like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who has been so instrumental in the fight for equality.
It's not just women, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I mean, she has taken money from a group called the Alliance Defending Freedom, which does not think favorably of the LGBTQ community. They believe in sterilization of the trans community. So, this is a person who, does not align with what we hope that this country is all about. So yeah, it's a really scary time. And I feel like for an activist, I feel like, for 30 years, I was trying to put things in motion and to reach a certain amount of progress. And now it just feels like I'm just trying to prevent them from regress, like from regressing backwards. And it's hard, and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is. I mean, I just keep, I hate to laugh, but it's like we're putting Aunt Lydia on the Supreme Court, like really.
Right.
So let's talk on a more positive note about women in government. So Katie, you have been pretty vocal about the need for us to elect women to public office because they are women. Mm-hmm. So tell us more about that and why you feel it's so important.
Sure. Well, women right now make up less than a quarter of most legislative bodies. We make up a quarter of Congress. We make up even less than that when you're looking at governorships, far less than that if you're looking at governorships or, the mayors of major cities. And so, if we look at, right now, we've passed 100 years since women got the right to vote, more specifically, since white women got the right to vote. But what we have not done is made the true progress that's necessary in terms of getting representation, equal representation. As we make up half the population, we should have half of elected offices. And that is not going to happen. We've seen the progress just move so slowly on that front. And I believe that's not going to happen without so much intentionality of us saying, it's valuable. Life experiences of women in and of themselves can make you qualified, right? Men have been elected because they're men for centuries, for generations. And it's now time for us to say that we want these different perspectives. We want people with different life experiences. And we want to get to the point where we have equal representation so that we know that the things that matter to us, whether it's childcare or and frankly, all issues are women's issues, as I talk about in my book. But childcare to investment in education to living wage and even the importance of raising the minimum wage. All of these have so many different implications for women and for moms in particular. And unless we have people who are truly fighting for those, who say that I know about this, I know it from my own life, then I don't think that we're going to make the progress that's necessary.
For sure. Alyssa, do you have thoughts on that as well?
Only that I think that from my experience in the women leaders and the women elected officials that I've come across, they lead from a place of service and a place of love and a place of care that's very different than how men lead. And I think, the fact that the most successful countries on the planet at keeping the pandemic under control have been led by women. I think that's a really important thing, and I think it's because we're not putting our families in jeopardy, for the economy. So I think that is an important thing, but also I think that when we fight for women's issues, we're fighting for all issues. We're fighting for, under the lens of feminism, we're actually the intersectionality of LGBTQ rights, rights for the incarcerated, rights for immigrants. So women, when we're fighting for our equality, we're really fighting to erase the hierarchy. And so that has implications for everything.
Yeah, for sure. And if we
what
think about,
say, sorry, go ahead.
Oh,
I was just going to say that, when you talk about the motivators for people to, why they serve and how they serve or how they lead as coming from a place of service, that's actually, there are studies that back that up that show that women, over and over, when women are asked why they want to run for elected office, it comes from a place of saying they want to do good for their community, or, to better serve their communities and the people that they, see every day and that they care about, that they want to advocate for change. That's the answer that women give. But when you ask men, overwhelmingly, the answer that they give is because they've always wanted to be a politician. And that alone is just such an overwhelming, like, you can just, the difference in someone who wants power for the sake of having power versus somebody who specifically wants to do good with it, regardless of party lines. I mean, there's a fundamental difference, I think, in motivation. And that's not to say that all men are doing it because they want a power grab, but that there's a significant, discrepancy there.
I was phone banking yesterday, and this woman said to me, "I don't vote." And I said, "Oh, really? How, why is that? Can we talk about why you don't?"
Audio there.
Can you hear me?
I can't. Can you hear me? I can hear Alyssa. I don't know.
Can you guys hear? Okay.
Hi.
I don't hear Alyssa for some reason.
I can hear you. So
okay. So this woman, she was like, I don't vote. And I said, "Well, why don't you vote?" And she said, "Because only people that want power and want to get rich run for office."
Oh.
And I mean, if we're going into it with that being the perception of a certain generation of women, then we have a lot to overcome as far as the narrative and messaging. And I think the only way to really do that is for more women to be elected and to be in office.
Mm-hmm.
We're certainly not going to do it by continuing to elect white men.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the impacts of a female vice president on the future of feminism. It could be historic, it could be inspiring, but what will it mean in reality? I mean, what can we as women do to ensure that if elected, the first Black woman vice president, that she's as successful and supported as possible? What do you think, Katie?
Well, first of all, women often are the harshest critics of other women. That's fact. And one of the things that we can do is to check ourselves and to say, whatever your initial reaction is, if you're thinking, "Oh my God, she just sounds so grating," or she sounds, bossy, or she's too ambitious, or any of these things that we hear, these tropes that we hear over and over again, especially of women who are seeking positions of power, that we need to look at ourselves and say, why are we reacting that way? And would we say the same thing about a man that was running for office or that was in a position of power? And I think that, creating that own accountability, and then also calling it out for other people if you hear them saying the same kinds of things. I think that we have to just generally create an environment across society's bounds that does not allow for that kind of criticism, that kind of sexist criticism to fester. And we need to call it out wherever we see it. Yeah, that's kind of my initial reaction.
I could not agree with you more. I think we have to call it out. Tina Chen, who is, she runs Time's Up, did this great campaign called We Have Her Back. And basically it was just exploring and doing the research on the media bias against female politicians, and how hard it is to have to try to overcome that, plus get your thoughts, to resonate with the public. So I would encourage everybody tomorrow, as they're watching that debate, if it seems like there are some biases going on, that you use the hashtag We Have Her Back, that you look up some stats and you tweet about them or Facebook about them, and really spread the word about this bias that is so we saw it in 2016. It is so hurtful to our country.
And pervasive.
And pervasive, very pervasive, and really sad, really sad.
That's a great suggestion. I am going to definitely do that. I think we need to show support, in every way possible. And, kind of on this note of, barriers for women, let's talk about women voters for a minute. We have a graphic here that shows the top barriers to women voters. There are a bunch of reasons, but these are the top 3. So the third one is the system is so polarized that there is no point. The second one is I don't know enough about politics. And then the first is too busy with work and family. Obviously, I can relate, especially during a pandemic, family, kids, homeschooling, all of these things. But the one statistic that I can't get out of my head is I've coined this the mansplained effect. And that is the one that says that women are 3 times as likely to say, I don't know enough about politics to get involved.
But I also think that's connected to what Katie was saying before, as far as needing representation, right? Like
100%.
As a woman, I want to learn about politics through Katie Hill, not through, God love any of the men, but like, that's who I want to learn from. Yeah, do you know what I mean? So I think that is very, very, very valid. The other things that you brought up, I think, are also valid. I mean, childcare is a big issue. It takes a really long time to vote because they have closed so many polling places. And that is a form of voter suppression. But also this idea that my voice doesn't matter or it's too polarizing. I mean, those are all, they want you to believe that, right? So to suppress the vote. And so that's why, like, what you're doing right now is so important. It's why what Katie does every single day is so important. We have to keep rising up.
We do.
It's all a form of voter suppression, because women will more likely vote Democratic if they actually show up to the polls. So of course, Republicans are going to do as much as they possibly can, make it as difficult as possible. You get no child care. We're not going to move it on a Saturday. We're not going to make it on a national holiday. I mean, I when there's not a pandemic, I drive people to the polls. I drive voters to the polls. And there's been too many times to count where I've knocked on a door and said, what are you doing? Let's go early vote. And she'll be like, but I have the kids. And I say, bring them. Let's go. Everybody in the car. Let's go. I'll wait with them in the car. And, it got her to go vote. But what if that wasn't happening? What if I wasn't door knocking and offering to take care of someone's children as she goes to the polling, Mm-hmm. So we got to make it easier for everybody, but specifically for women.
That's a great point. And I think, I was just going to say, as a mom, I think that instinct to like show up at a friend's house and pick their kids or take them to the park when the mom has just had a baby or when she's not feeling well. We've got that village, that squad mentality where we have each other's backs, and we have to put that into motion on election day as well. Everyone out there who's got a car, who's got the day, call a friend who needs a ride, call a friend who needs you to watch their kids while they go stand in line or whatever, because that's the way we're going to get this done. Sorry, Katie, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that you had what you were talking about this mansplained effect is so profound. I mean, I really cannot emphasize that enough, is that I don't think you will ever find a man who says, I don't know enough about politics to vote. That doesn't happen. And the reality is that we know just as much, if not more, than most of the men, even if we don't think that we do. We're consumers, we're news consumers. We absorb information on a day-to-day basis. And that's all that's required. That's all you need to know is that what you hear and what you experience. And the more you learn, the better. I think the more you learn, the better of a voter you become, and the more you're able to share that information with other people. But just being a citizen of the world and of the United States makes you somebody who's informed enough to vote. And especially when you think about all the people you've got to counteract, that don't know anything and that are showing up to vote, then we need you to show up.
Exactly. Well, the good statistic here for everyone is that 29% of women have become more politically involved in the last 3 years, which I think is great. And I think we can celebrate that fact. Why do you think that is? In the past 3 years, women have started to really take notice of, our role in the political process. Alyssa, do you have thoughts?
Oh, yeah. Because
I was going to say,
we elected a self-professed man who is a sexual predator. And then right around the same time, Harvey Weinstein was, accused and is now in prison. And I think because of Me Too, which we're coming up on the third year, October 15th is the third year that I actually tweeted that hashtag. And so I think because of that, people, women are using their voice more and more, and realize that like a collective pain can be translated into collective power. And I think the year that Katie ran, that was the most that any women had run and won. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, sure. And the number's even bigger this time. So I think that was the trigger point for so many of us. And, what we saw was just women who were like, oh my God, so much that we kind of took for granted, especially younger women who we I grew up in Southern California. I felt like my equality wasn't in jeopardy. And then suddenly it was in just such stark contrast. And there were so many people like that across the country that decided to either get politically involved in some way or run themselves. And now we've seen kind of the floodgates open, and I'm really optimistic about what that means for the future. But we need to keep it going. And women still have more barriers to overcome in order to run for office and in order to win. That we have to keep paying attention to that and consistently trying to call them out and to break down those barriers.
And what do you think, Katie, I'm curious, as someone who personally broke down the barriers in a system dominated by men, what do you think are the most key things that we have to do to start removing these barriers for women, both to engage in the political process and then also to run themselves?
Oh, where to start? Well, one of the things that I think is super important, and that I hope still remains one of the top priorities in what I hope is a new administration, but it's what we passed called HR 1, House Resolution 1. And it was about it was about a number of different things, but one of them is getting big money out of politics. Because when our politics are run by major corporations, by lobbyists, and by the political elite, effectively, that makes it so much harder for people in general, regular people, but especially women, to run successfully. Because we've been kept out of the political process for so long that these institutions, if we're just to keep the status quo, it's always going to be men who have, who went to the elite schools and whose dad was in office or whose granddad was in office and who know all these people and have been spending their entire lives groomed to become politicians, that have that edge and then have the ability to raise more money. And we have to make it so that any person, regardless of their life experience, has the ability to kind of compete on a level playing field. And one of the things that HR1 would do is create public financing of campaigns where you can raise a certain amount of money and it'll be matched. And that just changes the game in terms of the people who are able to run for office and win. And it does, I mean, HR1 does so many other things too, but that to me is one of the biggest things that could really kind of change the entire dynamics of what's possible within our elected, within elected office and within our political system, is to specifically try and return power to the people. And that means that women will be able to run and compete more fairly.
A level playing field. I mean, I think that sounds like something long overdue.
In so many ways.
So many ways. I want to switch gears now and talk about COVID-19. I mean, we've had what a week of news. I mean, where to begin with what's gone on in the past few days, but specifically the impact of COVID-19 on women, because, it's really taken its toll. I mean, Alyssa, you're with us tonight as someone who's been through coronavirus. Maybe you can share a little bit about your own experience, but I want to just share a quote from Debbie Walsh, who's the director of the Center for American Women in Politics from Rutgers University. And she says, when you think about coronavirus, women are among the most vulnerable in the population. Now, for a lot of women, it's survival in a very clear way. They're losing their jobs, they don't have health care, and they're worried about their kids. And I think that just sums it up so well, because it's this multi-layered stress and anxiety. And, while you've got the physical burden, you've also got all of these, economic stressors. You've got kids who used to go to school, they're at home now. Some women are juggling, the choice between homeschooling their child or going to work. I mean, it's an epic mess. So Alyssa, tell us, maybe from your own personal experience, but then also, what do you think we need to do to reboot the situation here with the next?
Is a really hard time. And it's, as a mom who is juggling all of that work, homeschooling, just, being with the kids 24 hours a day, then there's also the element of like how much of this is affecting them long term, and what are the psychological effects going to be? Like, are my kids going to wipe down the groceries because they saw me frantically wiping down groceries in the beginning of this? Like, what will be the long-term effects, and how much can we tell them? How much should we shelter from them? So it's really, really a strain. I think the interesting thing is, and I was in the beginning of this, and yes, I was sick very early, March, April, I was acutely sick, and I have post-COVID syndrome. And it's a very, very, very difficult illness, because it moves around your body, and one day it's in your stomach, and the next day it's in your lungs, and then your lungs kind of feel better, but no, then your stomach happens again. And I mean, it was 5 weeks for me acutely. And I remember getting out of the shower and I couldn't breathe. I took a steam shower and I couldn't breathe. And I was crying to my husband because I was gasping for air. And Bella just walked in at that moment. She was 5. And, she'll probably have to work on that at some point in her life. But once I got better, I realized such an interesting thing. I felt like I kept thinking to myself, this isolation feels really, really familiar to me. This isolation, like this kind of cocoon thing. And I realized it was my postpartum. It felt like that time when you bring the baby home from the hospital and it's all you because your husband really can't do anything, and the baby can't go out because doesn't have its vaccines yet. And so that kind of really cocoon sheltered thing sort of triggered my postpartum anxiety, which I thought was just such an interesting thing. But it's all, I feel all of the feelings, and when we look at the leadership right now, and And, when I first heard that he was positive, which, shocking that a man who refuses to wear a mask would catch, a highly contagious virus. Probably not shocking, right? But I really wanted to be like the bigger, we go high, and not because I had been so sick. I wanted to be respectful to him and his family as he was trying to recover. And so I didn't really say anything ill about him, but then he went on that crazy, I don't even know what to call it, where he was waving
the
from
motorcade.
the car. Yeah, and it was putting Secret Service in jeopardy. And then there was that weird video that he released last night with the helicopter, like Michael Bay had directed it. And I started getting really pissed, I have to tell you. And it was the first time I felt anger, and maybe I should have felt it earlier, but I don't know if I could, because where do you go from there? But it just felt like such propaganda. And 215,000 people have died. There's 14 million children that don't have enough food. And people who are hospitalized will not get the care that he received, right? So he just continues to be irresponsible. And it drives me nuts that then, we focus on that, which I think is natural. But then Joe Biden had this beautiful town hall yesterday. He's put forward such a comprehensive and clear plan on how we get this all under control. And it feels like that steady leadership is competing for airtime against the man that is wreaking chaos on the country. And I just wish we would turn off his lifeline to the media so that people can get to know Joe's platform, and women can see what a leader can do for them, rather than what Trump is doing. So I'm just sorry, I'm venting now. But
no, it's okay. I mean, I think we all share your frustration, especially, as moms. I think you put it so well when you said you feel all the feelings, because you feel for the teachers who are now having to go back into schools, who are also parents, who have to, we want our kids to learn, but we don't want to put a teacher at risk. You want to keep the nurses and the doctors in the hospitals safe, but irresponsible behavior is just, it's really ignorance, and it's insulting, and it's disgusting to all of these frontline workers who are just trying to, keep basic life, at a baseline level. So, and that brings up childcare again, which is, there's always been an underlying crisis in this country for affordable childcare. But now it's just, reached this point of exacerbated crisis that, we need to do something. We will not be able to continue our economy if kids can't go to school.
Well, it's a bunch of crises, right? Or crises. It is not only a childcare crisis, but also an aging parents crisis, right? Because I look at my parents and I think, could you imagine living your entire life for this moment, right? To work at this moment in your life to sip mimosas and watch your grandkids play baseball, and to have this be their existence, and then to have a president who might be cutting their Social Security. So it's it's caretaking of our children, but also our aging parents. And then I don't even know how single parents are doing it right now. My heart, that is where my heart is right now.
It's tough. It's so tough. I have gone through it with, ill parents, aging. My grandmother, God bless her, died last year, but she was born during the Spanish flu. And I feel like she knew. She was like, hell no, I'm not living out another one of these, epic plagues. But it's a huge stress for moms who are, taking care of their own family and have to caregive and protect and check in on their elderly parents while keeping everyone safe. So Katie, I feel like this 2020 in general, with all of its devastation has spurred some women to, like you did in your past, say, listen, enough is enough. I'm just going to run. I'm sick of this. I want to make a change. I want to get involved because you know how we like to say moms can get it done, or women can get it done. So Katie, what would you say to a woman who is contemplating running for public office, who might be feeling intimidated or unsure about the idea? What would you say to, push her to the next level to just do it?
Sure. Well, the first thing I would say is that there are a lot of different, organizations that are specifically intended for helping women run and helping them overcome those barriers. So Run for Something is a great one. That is, it's a site that if you can just Google it, I think it's runforsomething.org. But it tells you, it basically helps walk you through some of that initial process. Emily's List is another one that is a national organization that is focused on helping elect women. And they, in the sort of aftermath of 2016, started to put together these toolkits to make it even easier for women who are who are total newcomers to the political process. Another one is Emerge. And in California, it's Emerge California. There's different ones for each state. I think it's mostly broken up by state. Let me think if those are the really big ones. There's also, every community has a local Democratic club, or there are Republican ones too. But I'm not going to lie, like right now, that's just not the direction that most people are going. But yeah, getting involved in the party is actually a great way that I didn't even, I hadn't even pursued that, but I think that would, if I were to do something different from the beginning, that would have been a way that I would have done it, is to try and get involved in your local party in some capacity. And, that is just like, if you aren't thinking about running for office immediately, but you're thinking, I want to do something more than what I'm doing now, the local party has such a big influence on politics, way more than you could ever imagine, that I ever imagined as somebody who was coming in from the outside. And that's a great way to get involved too. But, it's intimidating. It does feel like there's just so much that you couldn't possibly know. And it's true, but there are organizations that are making it a lot easier for people.
That's great. And I think that piece you mentioned about local politics is so crucial because, we have the pandemic, we have the fires, we have all of this going on. And, the other crisis that we, still haven't dealt with in this country is the brutality against unarmed Black men and women. Okay. And I want to just make this crystal clear, because I've heard from folks, I don't see how voting is going to change that. The system is broken. What good is it going to do? We're too far gone. So Katie, as a former elected official, can you just break down for us how exactly our vote is in fact connected to the criminal justice system? Like when you go to the ballot, you're actually voting for a lot of folks who have direct control over law and the application of the law in your community. Yeah.
So, and this is where I wish, and I'm glad you're doing these kinds of events, but they need to happen so all over the place, because people we often think about the presidential election as kind of the end all be all, right? But the reality is that if you were to look on all of the different offices that could be held and how they would have an impact on the criminal justice system, president's probably the least of all of those. What matters the most is your local offices. It's your mayor, it's the sheriff, which is, people vote on the sheriff. And that's not always in the same cycle as a presidential cycle. You vote for your prosecutors, you vote for your attorney general for the state. You vote for your governor, who has a lot of say on the statewide criminal justice system. You vote for your city council, which can create new policies that are that require cities and jurisdictions to look at how they're conducting policing, and all of that has a much more immediate impact in the way that we've set up our republic. It's very locally controlled, and if you want to see immediate change, that's the best way to do it. And so I hope people start to not just vote. If you're looking at the ballot, don't just vote at the top, vote down, vote all the way down. Sometimes it's long, but I think that women do have a lot to offer, in that if we're nervous about voting because we don't know enough, then I think if you make the decision, I'm going to vote and I'm going to know enough about it, then you're going to do the research and you're going to figure out who the candidates are that agree most with and are going to fight most for the values that you care about.
And I think so true. I think because right now we have this great opportunity with more mail-in ballots. I think, people can request their mail-in ballot and actually sit with it and do some research on the internet and make it a family discussion around the table, because the truth of it all is it's the people at the top that have sort of kept this cyclical systemic racism going. Black poverty has been built into American society since the times of slavery, and politicians have spread this kind of false message of colorblind, and this was exactly what Nixon did. He made people feel like racism was over so that he could set forth a series of discriminatory economic policies during his 6 years in the White House, starting around 1969. And then he called America a free and open society, insinuating that if people weren't getting out of communities of color, it was because they couldn't pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Well, this is, it's time. And we cannot, especially as white people, we cannot sit back and continue to watch this happen. We have to educate ourselves. We have to, because it's gonna come down to us. It really is. And I really believe that. So I think we all need to educate ourselves on mass incarceration, and the desire to keep Black people behind bars, which stemmed from cheap labor, basically. And also, this is so important, and this also goes back to money in politics. At its core, capitalism functions by allowing the exploitation of the few by the wealthiest, or of the many by the wealthiest few. And that's an imbalance, and it's not going to get unimbalanced by just continuing to do the same thing over and over. We've got to make real change.
No, 100%. And I think, there's so much rhetoric out there. And I think as women, we have a responsibility, as you said, to educate ourselves and also to, understand where the message is coming from and what the facts are. Because there's a lot of, noise right now about law and order and lawlessness. But then we have this whole issue that, we haven't spoken about recently. It's going to be a matter of time, but the gun safety issue. As a mom, I dropped off my girls today for their first day of back to in-person school. Every single kid's got a mask on and they're walking in the door. You don't know who anybody is. This puts the fear into every parent's heart about what's going to happen with the masks and the shootings. And is this going to be an issue? It's like the next thing we haven't experienced yet in 2020, waiting around the corner. Yep. Katie, what do you think about the safety issue vis-a-vis this, rhetoric about law and order and, lawlessness? Meanwhile, folks can walk down the street with a machine gun and that's apparently fine.
Oh yeah. I mean, we've seen over and over again that the real perpetrators of violent acts, especially of mass shootings, are overwhelmingly white men, young white men who are often ideologically in sync with Trump and with his the things that he's espousing, and they have access to these weapons that are not intended for anything other than basically mass shooting, right? So I think that it's horrible that it took basically canceling school to stop school shootings, but we hadn't figured out or hadn't been willing as a society to put into place measures that were able to stop it otherwise. And so now if school's starting again, then I do think it's just a matter of time. And we passed one of the first pieces of legislation that we passed while I was in Congress was around gun safety. It was around basically, simple things like requiring universal background checks. That was it. We didn't even go for a full assault weapon ban or anything like that. It was just requiring universal background checks. And yet that went nowhere in the Senate. Mitch McConnell refused to even let it come up for a vote. And almost universally, Republicans voted against it. And there's no excuse for it. So I think the political mandate has to be put on those who are elected to serve us to ensure that they are prioritizing this. And the unfortunate thing, I guess, is that it has taken a back burner with COVID and with everything else. It hasn't been made as much of a priority, but it needs to be.
100%.
Yeah, and this is a perfect example of how different the parties really are. You have one side being the Republicans who feel like they should have any type of gun, and that the Second Amendment allows them to have any type of gun. And then you have the Democratic Party who believes, no, you have the right to have a gun, but you actually have to have it registered. You actually have to take a certain amount of classes. So just to go through a little bit of Biden's gun platform, he wants to hold gun manufacturers accountable, get weapons of war off the streets, ban the manufacture of sale of assault weapons and high capacity magazines. That is a big one. Regulate possession of existing assault weapons under the Firearms Act. Reduce stockpiling weapons. I mean, why should one person have like 4 AR-15s and, it's mind-boggling how we got to this point. And most importantly, we have to keep guns out of dangerous hands, right? It's about keeping certain guns out of certain hands. So that's background checks, that's closing the loophole in the system, and red flag laws. And we also have to reauthorize the Violence Against Women's Act, which Joe Biden wrote, which the House actually passed, that McConnell is also not putting up for a vote. So, I mean, I don't know how that bill is controversial or political. I think we should all agree that violence against women is wrong.
Yes.
There's a lot.
There is. I think that's such a great point. And I'm going to go now to some questions from our audience who have been sending in questions throughout our stream tonight. So thank you to everyone who sent in a question. We might not get to all of them, but feel free to email us at liveworkthrive@scarymommy.com. Send in your question, or you can enter it right into the chat room where you're watching on desktop. So here's a question. My daughter is 10. How can I start getting her politically aware without stressing her out in such a contentious environment? I think this is a great question. I will say personally, I had my 2 daughters watching the presidential debate, and my husband looked at me and he said, they can't watch this. They're going to get anxiety. This is awful. Like, this is like not appropriate viewing for children, which is an embarrassment, I have to say. But, from you, Katie, what do you think, is a good first step to, both introduce our kids, but also, keep it age appropriate with all the not so great stuff going on?
It's a great question on how to keep it age appropriate. That's something that I think is a real challenge, because I actually feel like the most important thing that kids can know right now is that it is messed up. And the only way it's going to get better is like, it's on the next generation. I mean, it really is. It's not going to be fixed with the people who are in charge right now. It has to change. And, I remember when I was a kid, one of my first major memories was in the 1992 election. My dad and my mom, they took us to the polls. They took me and my sister to the polls, and I would have been 5. And I remember talking with them leading up to it. And I knew that my dad was a Republican, my mom was a Democrat, and we were talking about the different issues. And of course, in, I guess, language that a 5-year-old would understand. But I remember at that point when we went into the polls that day, it was I think it must've been maybe it was in the primary, because, I know that my dad went into one voting booth and my mom went into the other. And I felt like I had to pick which one I went into. based on whether it was the Democrat or the Republican, because I knew who was voting for whom. And I decided that I was going to go in with my mom, even though I was a total daddy's girl at that point. And from then on, I decided I was a Democrat. And so like these early memories of saying like, this is what's happening. This is what's on the ballot. This is what I'm choosing and why. And allowing for that discussion. Their kids are curious. They have a lot of questions. And frankly, I think it's a challenge, and a good challenge for adults to be able to have to answer those questions. So, if the question is, why is it so bad? Then your honest answer can be like, because there have been people in power for too long who have made it this bad. And we need new people to get elected so that they can fix it. And that can be you.
That's a great point. Alyssa, tell us, I know you have a book that is oriented towards young people called Class
Hope.
President?
Well,
Hope, the Class President, right?
It's a series. Right now, we just released book 3, but it is about a budding activist who wants to change the world, but she has to get through middle school first. And it is a great introduction to all of the issues that we're facing as a nation, also diversity and inclusion. And it's not political at all, because kids aren't political. So just real quick, the reason why I wrote the books is during the fight for the Dreamers in 2017, I was going on a bus with Dreamers to go to Republican offices in the state of California, which there are many. People are always surprised. And so I taught my son about Dreamers and who they are and why I was fighting for them. And when I came home, he ran to me and he hugged me and he said, "Did you do it, Mom? Did the Dreamers get to stay home?" And I just thought, God, if we could just all break it down to that type of explanation, here are kids that were, that don't know their country, and we're trying to send them back to a place they don't know, the language even sometimes. And so I find that to teach them not about the politics of it all, because that can get scary, but to teach them about being good human beings and what it means to accept and what it means to step aside, to let others shine. And so that's what we try to do in our family, is just instead of getting into the politics of it, talk about the issues at the core of it.
Empathy. I think that's great. I think that's such a great, and kids are smarter than we give them credit for sometimes. I think
I'm always worried that their imagination is going to be worse than the reality. And if we don't tell them, then they're almost more anxious because they're creating something in their mind. I'd rather give them as many of the facts as I can.
Exactly.
And get ahead of that mansplaining effect early.
Right.
Oh, girl, I'm all over that. Don't you worry. Yeah. So, okay, one last question from our audience before we wrap up. So, Katie, why don't you take this one? Are you aware of effective ways to reach swing voters? What seem to be the issues that they might like to hear about most? It's a good one.
The reality is actually that the amount of swing voters, especially right now, is tiny. It just like, I think that the percentage right now that they're saying is like 3% of people who are considered swing voters. So, more importantly, in my opinion, especially if we're talking about right now in this election, is to make sure that everybody knows how to vote and is able to exercise their right to vote, that they have a voting plan. I know that you're listing out resources for that. It's less important to try and change somebody's mind at this point, but to make sure that people who already know how they would vote, to actually ensure that they're able to vote. And any of us can help with that. And no matter what state they're in, we can say, oh, do you know how you're going to vote? Have you registration deadlines are already passing, but have you, do you know what your polling place is? Do you know if you're voting by mail? Do you know what the rules are? And I know that you guys are going to list some of those links that we talked about. But as far as people who actually are undecided, it often is not about a particular issue. It's about like a feeling that they have around the candidates. And a lot of it comes down to that sense that they don't like either one of them, or that, their vote's not going to make a difference. And I think overcoming that piece is even more important. But in my experience from running for office, from serving in office, very few people can be swayed through argument or through kind of, especially in today's environment of, the way that the media has just kind of covered everything ad nauseum, and how partisan so much has become. It's like teams, right? Like team sports, you're an R or a D, and there's just not much in between. But I think that it's so much more important to be able to engage people and to make sure that they have the information that they need to be able to vote, and then to also, to counter misinformation, right? Like, I think that, that's a constant challenge for any of us, to be sharing with our family and our friends the accurate information that is out there. And, that's, we're never going to be able to completely counter it. But, our perspectives as a trusted individual, whether it's within our family or our friend network, goes a long way. And a meaningful conversation, as opposed to just an argument, is the only way that I think you're going to be able to reach a true swing voter.
That's such a great point. So as you mentioned, voter resources, we're going to put a few up on the screen right now for everyone. I encourage everyone watching just to read these over. We all need a reminder. If you're doing mail-in voting, you have to know your state's policy. Every state is different. If you're not sure, the deadline, if you have to request a ballot, if it's automatically sent to you, call your state's Secretary of State office. If you have a secrecy envelope, I like to say it's like a wedding invitation. Back in the 90s, when everyone had like 17 envelopes for the wedding invitation, use the damn secrecy envelope. Make sure your vote gets counted. If you're doing in person, look up your polling station in advance. As Alyssa said, you can even look up your electeds in advance. And it's like, I always get stressed when I go for a manicure and they're like, pick your color. And I'm like, oh my God. And it's like stress. And you pick one in a rush, and then you regret it after, and it's too much pressure. Same thing. Plan that in advance. Know before you go. Check on your neighbors when you're going to vote, especially if you have an elderly neighbor, or maybe it's a young person who this might be their first time voting, and they might need a little encouragement, or they might need some information. Don't forget your ID, of course. And then we also have some resources listed on the screen here for how to volunteer. Become a poll worker or a poll observer. Poll observer sounds really fun, to be honest. It's like a little CIA vibes. You get to go and like monitor people while they're voting. It's very exciting. Postcardstовoters.org. I just signed up for this. It's the coolest thing. You send a text. They send you a list of voters in swing states, and you get to write them personalized postcards. How awesome is that? And then there's the lastweekends.org, another organization that has concentrated volunteer efforts in the last 3 weekends before the election. Again, do the dry run, know before you go. Check out wevote.me and ballotpedia.org to get your sample ballot and look up who's running in your area. Katie also recommends democracydocket.com for the latest info on who is in your area. And of course, if you are experiencing problems, barriers to voting, issues at your polling center, we have the voter protection hotline up on the screen for you to report that and make sure that every vote is protected and counted. So we are almost out of time. That hour flew by. I could sit and talk to you two all night. It's been such a treat. I just want to let you all know, those of you who are listening, that our next live event will be on October 27th, focused on the upside of lockdown. We want to try and see the positives here. What we're experiencing is a lifestyle. It's not going away anytime soon. And so we're going to talk about the things that are not totally terrible. There are a couple, if you really look, not the worst all the time. We're going to talk to some sociologists and some other experts about how to embrace the things that are important to us. So register now at scarymommy.com/live-work-thrive. So thank you to our panelists. Katie, thank you for being here and for all you are doing for women, getting more women out there in public office. We really need you, and good luck with your book and the movie, Elizabeth Moss. So exciting.
Thank you so much.
Alyssa, I know it's cliche, but you were my after-school TV idol growing up as a girl, okay? And now as a grown woman, I feel like you are still an idol for so many women for what you've done for the movement as a mom. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care, everyone. Katie, I love you.
Thank you.
Love you too. Bye, guys. Thanks again.
So have a great night, Scary Mommies. This is our chance to turn 2020 around and get out the vote for our future, because we are moms and we know how to live, work, and thrive. Good night.